I've always really loved this converted Warboss I found online. It has a really brawny and industrial hardware look to it, like it was repurposed out of an excavator. And so when one of my followers commissioned me for a Death Skull Warboss, I thought he'd be a perfect fit. Death Skulls are all about looting, and the commissioner wanted that aspect emphasized, as well as the Warboss to be in mega armor. While the final build ended up quite different than the picture, it was still a good starting point and inspiration. For the base of this build, I used a Death Dread body. The original Warboss from the picture is using the body of a Defiler, but I thought a Death Dread body would be more in keeping with Orky design language. The proportions aren't right for a real body though, so I started by disassembling the Death Dread and detaching the pelvic region so I could later have my Warboss twist at the waist. I also did what I did with all of my Orc builds and sliced the body in half so I could widen it with spacers. I also did the same for his limbs, which are the pincer arms from the Defiler. Since the intention was for this to be power armor and not a mech, this added a fig leaf of plausibility that real limbs could fit within the arms. I was originally going to use the other Defiler legs for my Warboss's legs, but they were too scrawny and a better option seemed to be to simply use the arms again. They were a little too long though, so I scraped out the inner portion of them and cut into the pelvis of the Death Dread as well, so they'd fit closer. I used globs of green stuff to attach leg to pelvis, but wasn't really happy with the resulting pose. I decided to take inspiration from a Blood Bowl Black Orc whose pose I've always really loved, as it radiates strength and menace. The angle of the Defiler limb matches the Black Orc's right leg, but really doesn't the left, so I cut into the limb around the knee joint, careful not to do too much damage so I could repose it seamlessly. With the leg angle changed, I attached the Defiler arms to my Warboss in the same stance as that of the Black Orc. For the arms of my Warboss, I used the same Defiler limbs, this time combined with the upper arms from a Reacher miniature fire giant jailer. To fit them together, I cut off the top gear of the Defiler limb so the upper arm could socket into it. The fit wasn't seamless, but good enough for now as I knew I'd later cover it with an armor plate. I attached the arms to the main body, imitating the pose of the Black Orc, but it didn't really work well. The problem is that the Black Orc's forearms are rotated slightly, and that's not something the Defiler elbows can manage. I shifted them slightly to be more organic and decided to leave them for now until I'd attached his weapons. The next step was to start filling out the Warboss's body. This is the jaw plate from the Orc Mech Shop kit, and I thought would work well as the upper portion of the Warboss chest plate. A massive iron jaw is really common to Orc power armor, and I felt like would help tie the Warboss into that aesthetic language. I snipped down the top of the Death Dread torso to make room for the massive jaw, and fit a smaller Warbike mudguard jaw portion to look like an inner row of teeth. To help add plausibility that the Warboss's arms could fit in the Defiler ones, I glued over the joint between Organic Bicep and Inner Machine Elbow a curved armor plate. I'd swap out which ones I used in both arms quite a bit, but the principle of filling out the space remained the same. The front of the Death Dread torso was looking a little bland, so to add some interest I settled on adding this armor plate to it. Getting it to fit though required taking off the jaw plates, cutting off the front of the Death Dread chest so it would match the curve of it properly, and then fitting the jaw plate back in place. I also cut out a sheet of plastic card and cut it into an oblong so I could use it to top off his inner chest. At this point, I decided to step back and take stock of how the Warboss was looking as a whole. This is always important to do with a project, and I realized I kind of made a mistake. While I really liked the Mech Shop jaw, it wasn't quite wide enough to match the curve of the Death Dread body. To replace it, I decided to swap in this jaw plate from the Morknot kit, which is equally imposing and just a touch wider. It's not as angular and sharky, but once glued in place looked pretty good all the same. The left arm was looking dumb, so I added an armor plate to the bicep and repositioned it to a more plausible angle. I also glued one of the spiked armor plates from the original Defiler to the forearm to bulk it up a bit. I added the same armor plates to the Warboss's thighs and a few other armor bits to the knees and shin to give them some visual interest and asymmetricality. I don't really love the original claws the Defiler comes with. They're a little too crab-like and comical, but they're also the only ones that feel in scale with his arms. Kind of. This is one of the claws that come from the new Gaz kit, but grown double in size through molding and casting. It came out a little rough, but I actually like the brutal and pitted look that it gives it. Orc tech should never look new after all. To make space for it, I snipped off the gears at the end of the Defiler arms and glued new ones into the gap left between. Over those, I glued the claws after some reshaping of their connection point. Another size problem was that the Death Dread feet I usually use for my Warbosses were hilariously small and weren't going to work for this Warboss. Instead, I used the two from Estampa and sandwiched them between two Morknot talons. At this point, I decided to add a head. This is the head from the Black Orc I was showing earlier, though grown 4 times in size. I love the raw Xeno hate you can see in its eyes, and the gas mask look of its lower jaw. Unfortunately, I seem to be the only person who likes it and would later have to replace it per the commissioner's request. Before that though, I started work on bulking up the shoulders of the Warboss by layering a Def Dread plate over the one that had already been split in two and widened. Those I carved into and began experimenting with layering pistons and servers over them to really sell the idea of the Mega Armor as powered. Over them, I planned on adding the pauldrons of the Gorkanaut kit. This took a lot of fiddling, but turned out well in the end. I haven't really gone over it, but the back of the Warboss I outfitted with the two normal engines that come with the Def Dread and added a third in between, which fits perfectly. I love the busting out look they give him, as though he had to keep adding more as the armor grew more and more powerful and required more energy. Since I'd added the chest armor plate, something had been nagging me about the model, and at this point I figured out what it was. The chest was protruding too far forward, which gave him a very matronly and heavy look. I pried off the chest plate and dug out the material behind it so it could fit better, but that created the problem that now the jaw plate overhung it. A better fitting armor plate was actually one of the pauldrons in the Gorkanaut. The curve is suspiciously close to that of the jaw plate, and I snipped down the edges and glued it into place so it looked like it and the jaw plate were one piece. The final step to complete the Warboss was to outfit him with a gun for his right arm. I'll be honest, I kind of hate coming up with gun arms for orcs. Some people are really good at it, but it isn't a strength of mine. To me, they're just never as imposing or visually interesting as power claws or choppas. I first thought of giving him this cobbled together looter gun as it would help emphasize his looting nature, but a Warboss of this size needs a bigger gun. The largest I have is this cannon from the War Wagon upgrade kit, which I decided to sling under his arm as you can see here. While not the tallest Warboss I've made, this is by far the heaviest armored one and an absolute tank of a fighting machine. Though it wasn't by design, I really love his barrel chest, and it really sells the crude power of his mega armor. It's an inelegant shape, but one that looks like it could plausibly deflect anti-tank rounds. I've always tried to make my Warbosses kind of leaner and more intelligent than the average orc, but in this one I really embraced the monstrous Xeno strength of orc design language, and that energy is something I'm definitely going to explore more in the future. If you'd like to see those explorations, subscribe to my channel, check out my other massive orcs, and don't forget to like this video. If you're interested in commissioning me yourself, there's a link to join my email list in the description box where I'll announce when I'm accepting new ones. Thanks for watching.